Victoria Sterling stood at the head of the conference table, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the merger documents as she stared at me with those cold blue eyes. The same eyes that had looked right through me 18 months ago when I had confessed my feelings at Riverside Coffee Shop. The same eyes that had watched with satisfaction as security dragged me from this very building after I'd been framed for corporate espionage. The same eyes that would soon fill with terror when she realized her precious assistant Jake Thompson remembered everything from our previous timeline. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But this time, I wasn't going to let Marcus Chen steal my research and pin it on me. This time, I wasn't going to let Victoria destroy my career while pretending to be the victim. This time, when she inevitably begged me to save her company from the scandal I was about to unleash, I'd have a simple response. I'm sorry, but I'll be too busy assisting someone else. The morning alarm pierced through the Portland rain at exactly 6:30, just like it had 18 months ago. Except this time, instead of feeling nervous excitement about presenting my breakthrough strategy to the Sterling Dynamics board, I felt the cold satisfaction of someone holding all the cards. I rolled over in my cramped studio apartment, the same apartment I'd lost in my previous life when Victoria had me blacklisted from every major firm in the Pacific Northwest. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie Martinez, my colleague in strategic planning. Ready for the big day? Victoria seems extra intense this morning. If only Sophie knew that in another timeline, she'd been the one person who believed in my innocence. Even after the fabricated evidence surfaced, she'd quit Sterling Dynamics in protest and had spent months trying to clear my name. Now somehow she remembered too. I climbed out of bed and walked to the window overlooking the Willamette River. The Pacific Tower gleamed in the distance, its glass facade reflecting the stormy Oregon sky. Somewhere in that building, Victoria was probably reviewing the presentation. Materials I'd spent 6 months developing, the same materials that Marcus Chen would claim credit for in today's board meeting. The same innovative client retention strategy that would secure the Henderson Industries merger and make Sterling Dynamics the largest consulting firm on the West Coast. Except this time, I had proof of who really created it. Irony wasn't lost on me that Victoria had made me her executive assistant after rejecting my romantic advances. I think you'd be perfect in a supporting role, she'd said with that patronizing smile. What she'd really meant was that keeping me close would make it easier to monitor my work and steal my ideas. For 18 months, I'd fetched her coffee, managed her calendar, and watched her take credit for my innovations while she cozied up to Marcus Chen, the ambitious business development partner she'd hired 3 months after breaking my heart. I showered and dressed in the same navy suit I'd worn that fateful day, but this time I slipped a small recording device into my jacket pocket. Sophie had suggested it during our coded conversation yesterday. Apparently her memories of the previous timeline included watching me get railroaded by HR Director Diana Walsh, orchestrated the entire frame-up to protect Victoria's reputation. The commute to Pacific Tower felt surreal. Every detail matched my memories perfectly. The homeless man playing guitar outside Pioneer Courthouse Square, the barista at Stumptown Coffee who always misspelled names, even the same construction. Delays on the Morrison Bridge, but this time, instead of rehearsing my presentation in my head, I was planning Victoria's downfall. Sterling Dynamics occupied floors 20 through 25 of Pacific Tower. With Victoria's corner office commanding a spectacular view of Mount Hood, I'd spent countless hours in that office, bringing her reports and watching her manipulate situations to her advantage. She had a gift for making people feel valued while simultaneously undermining them. A skill that had helped her build Sterling Dynamics from a small consulting startup into a regional powerhouse. The elevator ride to the 24th floor felt endless. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the familiar sight of the strategic planning department. Open workstations arranged around Victoria's glass-walled office, with Marcus Chen's new space positioned strategically close to hers. The sexual tension between them had been obvious to everyone except the board members who'd bought into Victoria's carefully crafted image as a dedicated professional. Sophie looked up from her computer as I approached, her dark eyes reflecting The same knowing sadness I remembered from our last timeline. She'd aged well in the past 18 months, though I noticed the stress lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. In our previous life, she'd fought so hard to expose the truth that it had cost her everything. Her job, her reputation, even her relationship with her fiancé Tom Bradley, who'd worked in Sterling's IT department. "Morning, Jake," she said quietly, glancing toward Victoria's office where heated voices could be heard through the supposedly soundproof glass. "She's been on the phone with Richard Hayes since 7, something about the Henderson presentation." Richard Hayes was the board chairman, silver-haired veteran of corporate warfare who'd mentored Victoria since her startup days. In my previous timeline, he'd been the one to personally deliver the news of my termination, his face a mask of disappointed authority as he'd explained how corporate espionage was a fireable offense. The irony was that Hayes genuinely believed in Victoria's innocence, making him an unwitting accomplice to her schemes. I settled into my assistant's desk outside Victoria's office, the same desk where I'd worked diligently for months while she'd plotted my destruction. The computer password was still Sterling 2023. Victoria's lack of imagination in cybersecurity would prove to be her undoing. I began my morning routine of checking her calendar and responding to emails, but this time I was also systematically documenting everything that would soon become evidence. At exactly 9:15, Marcus Chen strode through the department like he owned the place. His expensive Italian shoes clicked against the polished concrete floors as he made his way to Victoria's office. Carrying the leather portfolio that I knew contained my stolen research, he was handsome in that generic corporate way. Tall, athletic, build perfectly styled black hair, and the kind of confident smile that convinced people he was trustworthy. Victoria had fallen for it completely. Through the glass wall, I watched their morning briefing unfold exactly as I remembered. Marcus spread out the presentation materials while Victoria nodded approvingly, occasionally touching his arm in a gesture that was just unprofessional enough to cross boundaries while remaining deniable. They were reviewing my breakthrough analysis of client retention patterns in mid-market companies, the research that had taken me 8 months to compile and validate. The Henderson Industries merger was worth $47 million to Sterling Dynamics. But more importantly, it would establish the company as the dominant player in Pacific Northwest consulting. My strategy had identified 17 specific intervention points where Sterling could prevent client defection during the integration process, potentially saving Henderson an additional $12 million in retained revenue. It was brilliant work, and Marcus Chen was about to present it as his own creation. Sophie appeared at my desk, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the break room. She set one down next to my keyboard and leaned in close, pretending to discuss scheduling matters. "Tom's been digging through the server logs from 18 months ago," she whispered. "He found something interesting about the night your files were allegedly stolen. Tom Bradley had been Sophie's fiancé and Sterling's head of IT security until he'd been quietly terminated 2 weeks after my firing. Officially, he'd violated company policy by accessing personnel files without authorization. Unofficially, he'd gotten too close to proving that the evidence against me had been fabricated. In this timeline, Sophie had convinced him to preserve the digital forensics data before his termination, creating an insurance policy we hadn't possessed before. The morning continued with the usual parade of meetings and administrative tasks that defined my role as Victoria's assistant. I confirmed her lunch reservation at Le Pigeon, rescheduled her afternoon call with the Seattle office, and printed copies of the presentation materials that would soon destroy her career. Every task felt like placing another piece on a chess board where I already knew the outcome. At 10:45, Diana Walsh emerged from the elevator wearing her trademark power suit and predatory smile. As HR director, Diana was Victoria's most valuable ally in corporate politics, someone who could make personnel problems disappear while maintaining plausible deniability. She'd been the architect of my character assassination, crafting a narrative of jealous desperation that had made my alleged corporate espionage seem believable to the board. Diana swept into Victoria's office without acknowledging my presence, a deliberate slight that reminded everyone of my subordinate status. Through the glass, I could see her animated discussion with Victoria and Marcus, probably finalizing the details of how today's presentation would be handled. In my previous timeline, Diana had suggested that Marcus deliver the presentation himself to maintain objectivity. Since there were concerns about my emotional stability following Victoria's rejection, Elias had been so carefully constructed, so perfectly timed, that even I had begun to doubt my own memories by the end. But now, with the clarity of hindsight and Sophie's support, I could see exactly how they'd manipulated every situation to their advantage. The missing files on my computer, the anonymous tip about industrial espionage, even the convenient discovery of Henderson Industries' confidential documents in my desk drawer. It had all been orchestrated to remove me as a threat while allowing Victoria to profit from my work. My phone buzzed with another text from Sophie. Amanda Foster wants to meet. Says she's been investigating Sterling for months. Amanda Foster was an investigative journalist with Portland Business Weekly who'd tried to interview me after my termination. I'd been too devastated to speak with her then, but she'd apparently continued digging into Sterling's business practices. Her interest in the company suggested that Victoria's problems extended beyond my stolen research. As the morning progressed toward the 11:30 board meeting, I felt the familiar weight of anticipation building in my chest. In a few hours, Victoria Sterling would stand before the company's directors and present my work as Marcus Chen's achievement. She'd use her charm and authority to sell them on a strategy that would transform Sterling dynamics while simultaneously destroying the person who'd created it. But this time, I was ready for her. The boardroom on the 25th floor was exactly as I remembered it. Polished mahogany tables surrounded by leather chairs, floored ceiling windows overlooking the Cascade Mountains, and the subtle scent of expensive cologne mixed with brewing coffee. 12 directors sat around the table, their faces reflecting the kind of serious attention that $47 million deals commanded. At the head of the table, Richard Hayes adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to review the Henderson Industries integration strategy that will secure our position as the region's premier consulting firm. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd been making corporate decisions since before I was born. Victoria, I believe you have a presentation for us. Victoria stood gracefully, her charcoal blazer perfectly tailored to project competence and control. She clicked the remote to activate the presentation screen, and my research filled the wall behind her in crisp, professional slides. Months of late nights, weekend analysis, and breakthrough insights reduced to bullet points and charts that would soon bear Marcus Chen's name. Thank you, Richard. What you're about to see represents a revolutionary approach to client retention during merger transitions. Victoria's voice was smooth and confident, the same tone she'd used when rejecting my dinner invitation 18 months ago. Our strategic planning team has identified 17 critical intervention points that can prevent the typical 32% client defection rate we see in similar integrations. I watched from my position near the back wall, officially present to take notes and manage logistics, but really there to witness my own intellectual property being stolen in real time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sophie sat at the junior analyst's table, her pen moving across her notepad in what appeared to be dutiful note-taking, but was actually a coded message system we'd developed during our previous timeline's desperate attempts to expose the truth. Marcus Chen stood to join Victoria at the presentation screen, his confidence radiating through the room like a peacock displaying its feathers. The breakthrough came when we realized that client loyalty during transitions isn't just about maintaining service quality, he began, using the exact words I'd written in my original research proposal. It's about creating psychological bridges that make clients feel valued throughout the uncertainty. The irony was suffocating. In my previous life, I'd developed this strategy after spending weeks interviewing Henderson's departing clients. From their last acquisition, I'd discovered that most defections occurred not because of service failures, but because clients felt abandoned during the transition chaos. The solution was elegantly simple. Assign dedicated transition specialists to each client. Maintain weekly communication schedules. And provide detailed roadmaps showing how the merger would benefit their specific business needs. Board member Patricia Hoffman leaned forward, clearly intrigued by the presentation. This intervention methodology could be applied to all our merger consulting work. What kind of retention improvements are we projecting? Victoria smiled with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver impressive numbers. Based on our analysis of comparable situations, we expect to achieve an 87% retention rate during the Henderson integration. That translates to an additional $12 million in preserved revenue for the client, which justifies our premium consulting fees. The boardroom murmured with approval. These were numbers that would make Sterling Dynamics incredibly attractive to other merger candidates, essentially turning my stolen research into a competitive advantage worth tens of millions in future contracts. I felt the familiar rage building. In my chest, the same helpless anger that had consumed me during my previous timeline's destruction. But this time I had Sophie's signal system and Tom Bradley's digital forensics evidence. This time, I had Amanda Foster's investigative resources and Detective Rivera's interest in corporate fraud cases. Most importantly, this time I had the recording device in my jacket pocket capturing every word of this presentation. Diana Walsh entered the boardroom quietly, carrying a manila folder that I recognized from my previous life's nightmare. Inside that folder were the fabricated documents that would soon be used to frame me for corporate espionage. Carefully crafted evidence designed to make my termination appear justified while protecting Victoria from any suggestion that she'd stolen intellectual property from a subordinate she'd romantically rejected. The presentation continued with Marcus explaining the implementation timeline. Using my detailed project management framework down to the specific weekly milestones and resource allocation charts, he'd even stolen my contingency planning matrices, the backup strategies I'd developed for handling unexpected client concerns during the transition process. Watching him present my work with such casual confidence was like witnessing someone else claim credit for your children. The beauty of this approach, Marcus continued, is that it creates a replicable framework for all future merger consulting projects. We're not just solving Henderson's integration challenges, we're developing Sterling Dynamics' signature methodology for the entire market segment. That had been my vision exactly, transforming Sterling from a regional consulting firm into a national leader in merger integration services. The strategy represented months of research into industry best practices, combined with innovative psychological insights about client behavior during organizational transitions. It was the kind of breakthrough thinking that could define a career, which was precisely why Victoria had decided to steal it rather than give me credit. Board Chairman Hayes nodded approvingly as Marcus concluded his portion of the presentation. Impressive work, Marcus. This methodology could indeed become our signature offering. He turned to Victoria with the kind of paternal pride that made me want to vomit. You've assembled quite a strategic planning team. Victoria's smile was radiant as she accepted the compliment that should have been mine. We're fortunate to have attracted such talented analysts. Marcus brings exactly the kind of innovative thinking that sets Sterling apart from our competitors. The meeting progressed through financial projections and implementation logistics, with various board members asking detailed questions about resource requirements and timeline management. Marcus fielded most inquiries with practiced ease, clearly having memorized every aspect of my original research. Occasionally, he'd defer to Victoria with respectful phrases like, "As you mentioned in our strategy sessions," or "building on your initial insights," maintaining the fiction that she'd been the intellectual driver behind the breakthrough. Sophie caught my eye from across the room and tapped her pen 3 times against her notepad. Our agreed signal that Tom Bradley was in position to capture digital evidence from his remote access point. Despite his official termination from Sterling Dynamics, Tom had maintained backdoor access to the company's servers through a system vulnerability he'd discovered but never reported. In our previous timeline, he'd tried to use this access to prove my innocence, but had been caught before gathering sufficient evidence. This time, we'd planned more carefully. While the board meeting provided perfect cover, Tom was systematically downloading email archives, document revision histories, and server logs that would prove the timeline of my research development versus Marcus's arrival at the company. The digital forensics evidence would show that all the breakthrough insights had been created months before Marcus was even hired, making it impossible for him to claim legitimate authorship. My phone vibrated with a text message from Amanda Foster, outside in lobby. Source confirmed Victoria's pattern with previous employees. Ready when you are? Amanda had been investigating Sterling dynamics for 6 months, following up on anonymous tips about intellectual property theft and workplace retaliation. Her source was apparently Kevin Park, former strategic planning analyst who'd left the company under suspicious circumstances after developing innovative client assessment tools that were later attributed to other team members. The presentation reached its climax as Victoria outlined the revenue projections for implementing my strategy across Sterling's entire client portfolio. Conservative estimates suggest this methodology could increase our annual consulting revenue by 18 to 22% within the first year, she announced, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made board members reach for their calculators. That would put us ahead of Morrison and Associates in the regional market, observed board member James Crawford, referring to Sterling's primary competitor. This could be the differentiator that establishes our dominance in the Pacific Northwest. The boardroom erupted in the kind of controlled excitement that accompanied major strategic breakthroughs. Directors exchanged meaningful glances and whispered calculations while Victoria basked in the admiration that should have been directed toward my months of innovative research. Marcus stood beside her like a proud co-conspirator, probably already planning how they'd celebrate their successful theft later that evening. But their celebration would be short-lived. In approximately 47 minutes, Detective Rivera would arrive with a warrant to examine Sterling's digital records. In 1 hour and 12 minutes, Amanda Foster would publish her expose revealing Victoria's pattern of intellectual property theft from subordinate employees, and in exactly 93 minutes, Kevin Park would provide sworn testimony about his own experience with having research stolen and credit reassigned to protect Victoria's reputation. The meeting began winding down with discussions of implementation, logistics, and budget approvals. Richard Hayes congratulated Victoria on assembling such an effective strategic planning team, while other board members praised Marcus for his innovative thinking and thorough analysis. The accolades piled up like salt in an open wound, each compliment a reminder of how completely my contributions had been erased from the official narrative. Diana Walsh approached the presentation table, carrying her manila folder of fabricated evidence, ready to begin the character assassination that would justify my termination and prevent any future claims of intellectual property theft. In my previous timeline, she'd waited until after the board's enthusiastic approval of the strategy before revealing the concerning evidence of my alleged corporate espionage, timing the revelation perfectly to prevent any questioning of the research's true authorship. This time, I had my own evidence ready to deploy. The recording device in my jacket had captured every word of Marcus's false claims and Victoria's knowing complicity in the theft. Sophie's coded notes contained timestamps and behavioral observations that would support our version of events. Most importantly, Tom Bradley's digital forensics evidence would prove beyond doubt that the strategy's core insights had been developed months before Marcus joined the company. As the board meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations, I felt the same mixture of rage and determination that had driven me through 18 months of exile and disgrace in my previous timeline. But this time, instead of being the victim of their conspiracy, I was about to become the architect of their destruction. Victoria approached my position near the back wall, her expression radiating the kind of satisfied confidence that comes from successfully executing a complex deception. Jake, please prepare copies of the presentation materials for distribution to the implementation team, she instructed, her tone carrying just enough condescension to remind everyone present of my subordinate status. Of course, I replied with the same deferential politeness I'd maintained throughout our professional relationship. Should I include the original research documentation in the distribution package? For just a moment, Victoria's confident expression flickered with something that might have been concern. She knew exactly what original documentation I was referencing. The detailed research files that would prove the strategy's true authorship and timeline of development. That won't be necessary, she said carefully. The presentation materials contain all the relevant information. But it was already too late for damage control. Detective Rivera was walking through Sterling's lobby with a warrant in his pocket. Amanda Foster was uploading her expose to Portland Business Weekly's website. And somewhere in the building, Tom Bradley was gathering the digital evidence that would destroy Victoria's carefully constructed lies. The trap was closing, and this time, Victoria Sterling would be the one facing accusations of corporate espionage. The chaos began precisely at 12:47 p.m., just as Victoria was savoring her victory lunch at Le Pigeon. I knew this because Sophie had been tracking her location through the company's executive calendar system, part of our coordinated effort to ensure maximum impact when the truth finally emerged. Meanwhile, Detective Rivera stood in Sterling's marble lobby, his badge gleaming under the recessed lighting as he presented his warrant to the bewildered security guard. Corporate fraud investigation, Rivera explained to the guard, whose name tag read Dennis and whose confusion was written across his weathered face. Need access to your 24th floor servers and any personnel files related to intellectual property development over the past 2 years. Dennis fumbled with his radio, trying to reach Diana Walsh or building management, but found himself caught in the bureaucratic void that occurs when unexpected legal action collides with corporate hierarchy. Rivera waited patiently, his dark eyes scanning the lobby with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent 15 years investigating white-collar crime. He'd seen enough corporate conspiracies to recognize the signs: nervous employees, hastily shredded documents, and the kind of panicked phone calls that echoed through office buildings when guilty parties realized their carefully constructed lies were about to crumble. On the 24th floor, Kevin Park emerged from the elevator, carrying a banker's box filled with documentation that would support his testimony about Victoria's previous intellectual property thefts. Kevin had been one of Sterling's most promising analysts until his innovative client assessment methodology had been attributed to senior staff members, effectively ending his career advancement and forcing his resignation. He'd spent months gathering evidence of the systematic theft, waiting for an opportunity to expose the truth without destroying his own professional reputation. "Where should I set up?" Kevin asked Sophie, who was coordinating the evidence presentation. From her workstation, while maintaining the appearance of normal business operations, the strategic planning department continued functioning around them, with most employees unaware that their company's carefully constructed facade was about to collapse in spectacular fashion. Sophie gestured toward the conference room adjacent to Victoria's office, where Tom Bradley was already connecting his laptop to the company's network infrastructure. Tom's technical expertise would be crucial for demonstrating how the digital evidence supported the timeline of intellectual property theft, showing exactly when each breakthrough insight had been developed and by whom. Access to server logs and email archives would provide timestamps that couldn't be fabricated or manipulated after the fact. "Amanda Foster is requesting building access," Sophie whispered, checking her phone for the latest updates from our journalist ally. "Security is stalling because she doesn't have a scheduled appointment, but Rivera's warrant should override their objections." Amanda had spent weeks developing her expose on Sterling Dynamics' pattern of intellectual property theft, interviewing former employees and analyzing public filings that suggested systematic underreporting of research and development contributions. Her investigation had uncovered at least 6 instances over the past 3 years where innovative strategies developed by junior staff members had been attributed to senior management, always following the same pattern of false accusations and strategic terminations that had destroyed my career. The elevator chimed as Diana Walsh returned from her extended lunch meeting, her usual confident stride faltering slightly when she noticed Detective Rivera's presence in the lobby. Even from the 24th floor, I could see her through the glass atrium, her power suit suddenly seeming less authoritative as she approached the detective with visible reluctance. She'd built her career on managing corporate crises and protecting executive reputations, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for a coordinated investigation backed by digital forensics evidence and multiple witness testimonies. Chen chose that exact moment to return from his celebratory lunch with potential clients, his Italian leather briefcase swinging confidently as he entered the building. He'd been riding high on the morning's successful presentation, probably already planning how he'd leverage his stolen research into a promotion or partnership opportunity. The sight of Detective Rivera examining corporate documents in the lobby should have triggered immediate concern. But Marcus's arrogance prevented him from recognizing the danger until it was far too late. Tom Bradley looked up from his laptop, screen, his face reflecting the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from uncovering irrefutable evidence of systematic corruption. "Jake, you need to see this," he said quietly, angling his screen so I could view the email exchanges he'd recovered. From the company's servers, the correspondence between Victoria and Marcus revealed the true scope of their conspiracy, including detailed discussions about how to frame me for corporate espionage while maintaining plausible deniability for their theft. The emails were damning in their casual cruelty. Victoria's messages referenced neutralizing the Thompson problem and ensuring proper credit assignment for strategic initiatives. Marcus had responded with suggestions for manipulating evidence and coordinating testimonies, treating my professional destruction like a routine business optimization problem. Most disturbing were the timestamps, which proved their conspiracy had begun within days of my romantic rejection, transforming personal humiliation into systematic professional sabotage. Sophie's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Amanda. "Foster, source inside Henderson Industries confirms they've been questioning the strategy's authorship. Apparently someone there remembered Jake from previous consulting interactions and was surprised his name wasn't mentioned in the presentation. Materials. This was an unexpected development that could provide additional corroboration for our evidence. Henderson's executives had worked with me directly during preliminary merger discussions, where I'd presented early versions of the retention strategy that would later be stolen and refined. Their surprise at my absence from the final presentation could help establish the timeline of intellectual property theft, especially if they could provide documentation of our earlier interactions. Kevin Park finished arranging his evidence materials across the conference table, creating a comprehensive timeline of Victoria's pattern of intellectual property theft stretching back nearly 3 years. Each case followed the same methodology: identify promising research from subordinate employees, gradually assume credit through collaborative reframing, then eliminate the original contributors through fabricated performance issues or ethical violations. The systematic nature of the abuse suggested institutional knowledge and executive-level coordination that extended beyond individual cases of theft. "There's a pattern here that goes deeper than personal vendettas," Kevin explained as he organized documents chronologically. Victoria isn't just stealing ideas. She's built Sterling's entire competitive advantage on systematic intellectual property theft from her own employees. The company's reputation for innovation is essentially fraudulent. The implications were staggering. If Sterling Dynamics had built its market position through systematic theft of employee innovations, the legal and financial consequences could destroy the company entirely. Clients would question the authenticity of previous consulting work. Competitors would challenge contract awards. Investors would flee from an organization built on fraudulent intellectual property claims. Victoria's personal ambitions had potentially jeopardized the livelihoods of every Sterling employee. Detective Rivera's investigation was methodically uncovering layers of evidence that supported our allegations of systematic corporate fraud. His warrant provided access to financial records, showing unusual bonus payments to senior staff members following major client wins, suggesting a pattern of rewarding intellectual property theft rather than legitimate innovation. The timing of these payments correlated perfectly with the termination dates of employees whose research had been appropriated, creating a financial trail that would be impossible to explain through legitimate business practices. My recording. The device had captured Victoria's knowing participation in Marcus's false presentation, providing audio evidence of her conscious involvement in intellectual property theft. Combined with the digital forensics evidence, witness testimonies, and financial documentation, the case against Sterling's leadership was becoming overwhelming. But the most satisfying aspect was watching their arrogant confidence transform into desperate damage control as they realized the scope of evidence arrayed against them. Diana Walsh's emergency meeting with building security was clearly visible through the glass atrium, animated gestures suggesting increasingly frantic attempts to limit Detective Rivera's access to corporate records, but warrants for corporate fraud investigations carry significant legal weight, and her efforts to obstruct justice were only creating additional evidence of systematic conspiracy. Every attempt to hide information or limit access reinforced the pattern of guilty behavior that Rivera had learned to recognize during his years investigating white-collar crime. Marcus Chen finally noticed the unusual activity in the lobby and began making urgent phone calls, probably trying to reach Victoria or coordinate damage control efforts. His previous confidence had evaporated as he realized that the morning's successful presentation might have been his last moment of professional triumph. The stolen research that was supposed to launch his career was about to become evidence in a criminal investigation that could result in federal charges for intellectual property theft and conspiracy to commit fraud. Amanda Foster gained building access through Detective Rivera's intervention. Her press credentials and investigation warrant providing the legal authority to document the unfolding corporate scandal. Her presence added another layer of pressure to Victoria's crisis management efforts. Since media exposure would amplify the legal consequences and make it impossible to contain the damage through internal negotiations or settlement agreements. Once the story broke publicly, Sterling's clients and investors would demand immediate explanations that Victoria couldn't provide without admitting systematic fraud. The conference room had become a war room where justice was finally being assembled. From months of careful planning and evidence gathering, Tom Bradley's digital forensics, Kevin Park's witness testimony, my audio recordings, and Amanda Foster's investigative documentation created a comprehensive case that would be impossible to dismiss or discredit. After 18 months of exile and professional destruction, I was finally watching Victoria Sterling face the consequences of her systematic theft and betrayal, but the most satisfying moment was still to come. Watching Victoria return from her victory lunch to discover that her carefully constructed empire was collapsing in real time. With every lie exposed and every theft documented for legal prosecution, the woman who had rejected my heart and stolen my career was about to learn what it felt like to lose. Everything she'd built through deception and betrayal, Victoria Sterling's heels clicked against the marble lobby floor with the same confidence she'd carried since morning, until she spotted Detective Rivera examining corporate documents with building security. Her stride faltered for just a moment. The first crack in the armor of arrogance that had protected her throughout years of systematic theft. She approached the detective with the practiced charm that had convinced board members and clients of her integrity. But I could see the calculation behind her smile from my vantage point on the 24th floor. "Officer, I'm Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics. Is there some way I can assist you?" Her voice carried the perfect blend of concern and authority. The same tone she'd used when explaining why my termination was necessary for company security. She extended her hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every interaction through sheer force of personality. Detective Rivera shook her hand politely, but didn't return her smile. "Detective Rivera, Portland Police Bureau. We're executing a warrant related to allegations of corporate fraud and intellectual property theft. I'll need access to your executive offices and personnel files going back 24 months. The color drained from Victoria's face so quickly that even Dennis, the security guard, noticed her sudden pallor. She recovered with practiced grace, but not before revealing the fear that was beginning to corrode her confidence. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Sterling Dynamics maintains the highest ethical standards in all our business practices. That's what we're here to verify," Rivera replied, his tone suggesting he'd heard similar denials countless times during fraud investigations. "I'll also need to speak with your HR director and anyone involved in strategic planning initiatives." Over the past 18 months, Victoria's mind was clearly racing through damage control scenarios, trying to calculate how much Rivera knew and what evidence might exist to support the allegations. Her eyes darted toward the elevators. She's probably wondering if she could reach her office to destroy incriminating documents before the investigation expanded upstairs. But Rivera's warrant was comprehensive, and his presence in the lobby meant that any attempt to tamper with evidence would only strengthen the case against her. Marcus Chen appeared at Victoria's side like a loyal lieutenant, his earlier confidence replaced by barely concealed panic as he processed the implications of a police investigation. "Victoria, what's happening?" Victoria called about some kind of problem with corporate records. "Nothing we can't handle," Victoria replied, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. She was beginning to realize that her carefully constructed facade was under serious legal scrutiny. The standard corporate deflection tactics wouldn't work against a determined fraud investigation. "Detective, perhaps we could discuss this." Matter in my office, where we can review your concerns privately. Rivera consulted his warrant documents before responding. Actually, I'll need your office secured as evidence while we examine your computer systems and document storage. We have a conference room reserved on the 24th floor for interviews. Mention of the 24th floor sent another wave of panic across Victoria's features. That was where Tom Bradley was currently extracting digital evidence, where Kevin Park had assembled his timeline of systematic theft, and where Amanda Foster was documenting everything for her expose. Victoria was walking directly into the carefully prepared trap that would destroy her career and reputation. Diana Walsh materialized from the elevator bank. Her usual composure strained as she approached the group gathered around Detective Rivera. "Victoria, I've been trying to reach you. We need to discuss some urgent personnel matters that have come to light." Diana's timing was perfect for our purposes, but disastrous for Victoria's damage control efforts. Her attempt to communicate coded warnings only reinforced the appearance of guilty coordination that Rivera had learned to recognize during corporate fraud investigations. Every whispered conversation and nervous glance was being cataloged as evidence of systematic conspiracy to obstruct justice. "Personnel matters can wait," Rivera interjected firmly. "Right now I need Ms. Sterling and Ms. Walsh to accompany me upstairs for questioning. Mr. Chen, you'll need to remain available." As well, the elevator ride to the 24th floor was suffused with the kind of tension that precedes dramatic revelations. Victoria stood rigidly between Detective Rivera and Diana Walsh, her mind probably racing through contingency plans that couldn't account for the comprehensive evidence we'd assembled. Marcus fidgeted with his phone, likely trying to delete incriminating messages or coordinate alibis. But his digital communications had already been preserved through Tom Bradley's forensics work. When the elevator doors opened, Victoria's worst fears were realized. The strategic planning department had been transformed into an evidence processing center, with investigators examining computer workstations and document storage areas. Kevin Park sat at the conference table surrounded by timeline charts and witness statements, his presence indicating that other victims of intellectual property theft were cooperating with the investigation. Tom Bradley looked up from his laptop as our group entered the department, his expression reflecting the grim satisfaction of someone who'd finally gathered enough evidence to expose systematic corruption. "Detective Rivera, I have the server logs and email archives ready for your review. The digital forensics confirm everything we discussed." Victoria's composure finally cracked completely as she recognized Tom Bradley and realized the scope of evidence being assembled against her. "Tom, what are you doing here? You're not authorized to access company systems." Her voice carried a note of desperation that hadn't been present during the morning's confident presentation. "Actually, I'm here as a material witness in a fraud investigation," Tom replied calmly. "My access authorization comes from Detective Rivera's warrant, which supersedes corporate security policies." Amanda Foster chose that moment to emerge from Victoria's glass-walled office, her camera equipment and notepad suggesting she'd been documenting evidence for her investigative report. "Ms. Sterling, I'm Amanda Foster from Portland Business Weekly. I'd like to ask you about allegations of systematic intellectual property theft from your employees." The convergence of legal investigation and media scrutiny created exactly the kind of comprehensive pressure that Victoria couldn't deflect through charm or corporate maneuvering. Her carefully constructed empire was collapsing in real time. With every lie exposed and every theft documented for public consumption, the woman who had built her success on stealing other people's innovations was finally facing the consequences of her systematic betrayal. Detective Rivera gestured toward the conference room where our evidence had been assembled into a comprehensive case against Sterling's leadership. "Ms. Sterling, I need you to review some documents and recordings that have been brought to our attention. These materials suggest a pattern of intellectual property theft and employee retaliation that constitutes criminal fraud." Victoria's legs nearly buckled as she realized the full scope of evidence arrayed against her. The conference table displayed Kevin Park's timeline documentation, Tom Bradley's digital forensics, and my audio recordings of the morning's presentation, where Marcus had claimed credit for stolen research. Every piece of evidence reinforced the pattern of systematic theft that had characterized her leadership of Sterling Dynamics. "This is clearly a coordinated attack by disgruntled former employees," Diana Walsh interjected, attempting to frame The investigation as workplace retaliation rather than legitimate fraud prosecution. These people were terminated for cause and are now fabricating accusations to damage the company's reputation. Kevin Parks stood up from the conference table, his voice carrying the moral authority of someone who'd suffered through systematic theft and professional destruction. Diana, you personally orchestrated my termination after senior management appropriated my client assessment methodology. The documentation proves that my innovations were attributed to other staff members within weeks of my departure. The room fell silent as the weight of Kevin's accusations settled over Victoria and Diana. They were facing not just individual allegations of theft, but evidence of systematic conspiracy to steal intellectual property from multiple employees over several years. The legal implications extended far beyond individual cases to suggest institutional fraud that could result in federal prosecution. Tom Bradley activated his laptop presentation system, displaying email exchanges between Victoria and Marcus that revealed their conspiracy to frame me for corporate espionage while stealing my research. These server logs show the exact timeline of document access and modification, proving that the strategic planning methodology was developed months before Mr. Chen joined the company. Victoria sank into a conference chair as the digital evidence destroyed any possibility of maintaining her innocence. The emails displayed on Tom's screen contained detailed discussions of how to neutralize the Thompson problem and ensure proper attribution of strategic initiatives. Her own words were providing the evidence necessary to prosecute her for conspiracy and fraud. Marcus Chen attempted one last desperate deflection as he realized his career was evaporating along with Victoria's. These allegations are completely unfounded. The strategic planning methodology was developed through collaborative effort, and Jake Thompson was terminated for legitimate security violations. I stepped forward from my position near the back wall, my voice steady with the confidence of someone who'd finally gathered enough evidence to expose the truth. Actually, Marcus, I have audio recordings of this morning's presentation where you claimed credit for research that was completed months before you were hired. Detective Rivera, would you like me to play the relevant portions? The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's empire of lies was crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence, and her attempts at damage control had only strengthened the case against her. The woman who had rejected my heart and stolen my career was finally facing justice for her systematic betrayal of every employee who trusted her with their innovations and loyalty. Amanda Foster's camera captured Victoria's expression as the full scope of her exposure became clear. Legal prosecution, media scrutiny, and professional destruction that would make my previous suffering seem mild by comparison. The trap had closed perfectly, and there was no escape from the consequences of 18 months of careful planning and evidence gathering. 6 months later, I stood in the same Pacific Tower lobby where Detective Rivera had first executed his warrant, but this time I wore a tailored suit that reflected my new position as senior partner at Morrison & Associates. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sterling Dynamics' former rival had offered me exactly the recognition and compensation that Victoria had denied through her systematic theft. My innovative client retention strategies were finally bearing my name on consulting proposals worth millions in revenue. The Multnomah County Courthouse had delivered justice with the kind of thoroughness that surprised even Amanda Foster, whose expose had sparked federal investigations into corporate fraud patterns across the consulting industry. Victoria Sterling received 8 years in federal prison for conspiracy, intellectual property theft, and obstruction of justice. The judge had been particularly harsh about her abuse of authority and systematic exploitation of subordinate employees who'd trusted her with their career advancement. Marcus Chen's sentence of 5 years reflected his role as a willing accomplice rather than the primary architect of the conspiracy. His cooperation with federal prosecutors had revealed additional cases of intellectual property theft at his previous companies, suggesting that Victoria's recruitment of him hadn't been coincidental. They'd found each other through their shared expertise in stealing innovations from vulnerable employees who lacked the resources to fight back against corporate retaliation. Diana Walsh faced 3 years for her role in fabricating evidence and orchestrating wrongful terminations to cover up the theft. Her fall from HR director to federal Prisoner served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of enabling systematic workplace abuse. The legal proceedings had exposed her involvement in at least 12 cases of fraudulent employee terminations designed to protect executive reputations while destroying innocent careers. Sterling Dynamics collapsed within 4 months of the investigation's conclusion, its client base fleeing to competitors who could provide legitimate strategic consulting without the taint of systematic fraud. The company's assets were liquidated to pay legal settlements to the employees whose intellectual property had been stolen. With Kevin Park receiving the largest compensation for his years of documented abuse, the Pacific Tower office space now housed a nonprofit organization focused on protecting employee rights in corporate environments. Sophie Martinez had joined me at Morrison & Associates as Director of Strategic Innovation. Her loyalty and courage during our investigation earning her the recognition she'd always deserved. We developed new client retention methodologies that built upon my original research while incorporating insights from our unique experience with corporate conspiracy and systematic theft. Our work was generating industry acclaim and substantial revenue for a firm that valued authentic innovation over stolen brilliance. Tom Bradley founded his own cybersecurity consulting company, specializing in digital forensics for corporate fraud investigations. His technical expertise had become legendary among law enforcement agencies investigating white-collar crime, and his testimony in the Sterling case had established precedents for using server logs and email archives to prove intellectual property theft. The skills he'd developed exposing Victoria's conspiracy had launched a successful career protecting other employees from similar abuse. Kevin Park returned to strategic consulting with a specialized focus on organizational ethics and intellectual property protection. His experience as a victim of systematic theft had given him unique insights into recognizing and preventing corporate fraud before it could destroy careers and companies. Several major consulting firms had hired him to audit their internal processes and ensured that employee innovations were properly attributed and rewarded. Amanda Foster's investigative series on corporate intellectual property theft won a regional journalism award and sparked legislative hearings about protecting employee rights in competitive industries. Her documentation of the Sterling conspiracy had revealed similar patterns at other companies, leading to federal task forces focused on systematic workplace fraud. The media attention had also launched her career as a nationally recognized investigative journalist specializing in corporate corruption. Detective Rivera's successful prosecution of the Sterling case earned him promotion to head the Portland Police Bureau's white-collar crime division. His methodical approach to corporate fraud investigation had become a model for other departments, dealing with intellectual property theft and workplace retaliation. The Sterling case files were now used as training materials for investigators learning to recognize patterns of systematic employee exploitation. The Henderson Industries merger had proceeded successfully under Morrison & Associates guidance, with my authentic strategic consulting delivering even better results than the stolen methodology Victoria had presented. Henderson's executives publicly credited my work with saving them over $15 million in retained revenue during the integration process, vindication that felt sweeter than any personal revenge could have provided. Board Chairman Richard Hayes faced civil lawsuits from Sterling's former employees and criminal charges for his willful ignorance of the systematic fraud occurring under his oversight. His reputation as a respected corporate leader was destroyed, along with his substantial personal wealth, which was seized to pay damages to the employees whose careers had been ruined by his negligence. The man who'd personally delivered news of my termination was now facing bankruptcy and potential prison time. The most satisfying aspect of my vindication wasn't the financial compensation or professional recognition, though both were substantial. It was the knowledge that my courage in exposing the truth had protected countless future employees from suffering the same systematic abuse that had nearly destroyed my career. Victoria's conspiracy had been more extensive than anyone realized, and stopping it had prevented years of additional theft and retaliation. My new office at Morrison & Associates overlooked the Willamette River, with a view that reminded me daily of how far I'd traveled from the desperate morning when I'd awakened, with memories of my previous timeline's destruction. The recording device that had captured Victoria's conspiracy now sat in my desk drawer as a reminder that truth and justice sometimes require patience, planning, and the courage to fight powerful people who believe themselves untouchable. Sophie knocked on my door as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across my office. Jake, the Portland Business Journal, wants to interview us about the new client retention framework, calling it the most innovative strategic methodology in the Pacific Northwest. I smiled as I considered how different this recognition felt from the stolen credit that had launched Victoria's downfall. This time my name was properly attached to my innovations. My contributions were honestly acknowledged, and my career was built on authentic achievement rather than systematic theft. The woman who'd made me her assistant after rejecting me had learned the hard way that some people refuse to stay defeated. The irony was perfect. Victoria Sterling had spent 18 months terrified that I might assist someone else with my talents, never realizing that her fear would ultimately become reality through her own criminal behavior. Now she had 8 years in federal prison to contemplate how her systematic theft and betrayal had transformed a heartbroken assistant into the architect of her complete destruction. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.